The day they bulldozed my great-grandfather's bridge was the day I decided to turn their $4 million lakefront resort into a muddy parking lot. It's 6 in the morning on a Tuesday. I'm sipping coffee on my dock when the low rumble of diesel engines cuts through the mist. Through the fog, I see a bulldozer crawling toward the stone bridge my great-grandfather built with his own hands in 1923. The same bridge that connected our community for 100 years. The same bridge a power-hungry HOA president decided was an eyesore. But here's what Linda Prescott and her polished HOA board didn't know about. Texas water law, my great-grandfather didn't just build that bridge. He controlled the dam, and what I inherited wasn't just land. It was the legal right to control the entire lake. So tell me, what would you do if someone destroyed your family's legacy? Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I'm curious how many of you have faced these HOA tyrants yourselves. My name's Jake Morrison. I'm a civil engineer, and 3 months ago I inherited the most beautiful stretch of lakefront you've ever seen. My great-grandfather, Samuel Morrison, built our family cabin back in 1920, right after he came home from the Great War. But his real masterpiece was the bridge. Didn't just throw together some planks, he hand-cut limestone blocks from the local quarry and built a solid stone arch bridge that connected our side of the lake to the main road. For a century, that bridge carried fishermen, kids heading to swimming holes, and neighbors helping neighbors. It wasn't just a bridge, it was the heart of our community. When I inherited the place, my wife Sarah and I had plans. We'd been saving for years, dreaming of retiring there. I'd fix up the old cabin, maybe take on a few consulting projects from home, and spend my mornings fishing off the dock. The creak of those weathered boards under my boots sounded like a lullaby. Then came Linda Prescott. Linda's the kind of woman who wears pearls to the grocery store and drives a spotless white BMW that's never touched gravel. She moved into Whispering Pines 2 years ago, the luxury development that popped up across the lake like weeds after rain. Within 6 months, she'd worked her way into the HOA presidency. I should have seen it coming when I got that first certified letter. You know the kind, thick envelope, official seal, that sinking feeling in your stomach before you even open it. Inside was a letter on fancy stationery declaring my bridge a violation of community architectural standards. I laughed. Out loud. My bridge was standing long before her subdivision was even built. But Linda had done her research. The letter cited HOA Covenant 47B, architectural review requirements, and threatened me with $500 a day in fines if I didn't remove the bridge within 30 days. That's when I started digging. Literally through my grandfather's attic. I found dusty old boxes filled with papers that smelled like time itself, survey maps, deeds, and most importantly, the grandfathering clause that protected existing structures. My bridge was older than the HOA by 8 decades. Armed with proof, I walked into their next meeting at the community center. You know that smell. Floor wax, stale coffee, and disappointment. I laid my documents across the table like a winning poker hand. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Linda didn't even glance at my paperwork. She smiled that fake politician's smile and said, Times change, Mr. Morrison. Progress requires sacrifice. The board voted 5-2 in favor of enforcement. Her allies, mostly newcomers with deep pockets and shallow sense, outnumbered the old-timers who still remembered what community really meant. Walking back to my truck, gravel crunching under my boots, I realized this wasn't about rules or aesthetics. It was about power. Linda looked at my weathered cabin and beat-up pickup and decided I didn't fit her version of an upscale neighborhood. She wanted me gone. Sarah tried to stay hopeful. We'll fight this, she said, squeezing my hand over dinner. You've got the law on your side. I smiled, but deep down I wondered if being right would be enough. What Linda didn't know was that she'd just picked a fight with the wrong engineer. I didn't just understand property law, I understood water. 3 days after that meeting, I spotted 2 men in matching polo shirts near my property line early one morning. Morning, gentlemen, I called out, coffee in hand. Y'all lost? The older one, built like a retired linebacker, raised a clipboard. Oh, compliance patrol, sir. We're documenting violations. I nearly choked on my coffee. Violations like what? He started reading. Grass exceeds HOA standard of 3 inches. Dock requires repainting. Storage shed needs pressure washing. Over the next 2 weeks, they wrote me up for everything short of breathing too loud. My mailbox was apparently the wrong shade of black. My welcome mat didn't meet size guidelines. They even fined me for having a fishing net visible from the road. By week 3, I was facing $1,200 in fines. That's when I did what any good engineer would do. I studied the system. Turns out Linda's husband, Rick, owned Prescott Security Solutions, the very company the HOA was paying $3,000 a month to enforce compliance. Cute, right? I checked the state contractor licensing site and found something interesting. Rick's security license had expired 6 months earlier. He'd been operating illegally the whole time. Here's a tip. In Texas, HOA security must be licensed just like any private firm, and most aren't. Always check before they cite you. But I wasn't done. A buddy of mine does commercial inspections, so one Saturday we took a walk around Linda's perfect property. Her deck extension? No permit. Her pool house? Built 6 inches over the setback line. That fancy Japanese garden she bragged about? 3 feet onto my land. I filed complaints with the state board about Rick's illegal business and requested a formal property survey. Quietly by the book. I documented everything. Within a week, the gossip started. People whispering at the hardware store that Jake Morrison was difficult, that I was hurting property values. Sarah came home from the grocery store looking defeated. The cashier barely looked at me, she said. Even Mrs. Patterson acted like I was contagious. Then came the anonymous complaints. Someone told the county my bridge was unsafe. Another claimed I was dumping chemicals in the lake, which was laughable, since I test water for a living. But that's when Linda made her first real mistake. While she was busy politicking, I was digging through technical documents. I'd filed a public records request for anything related to water rights and dam operations. What I found changed everything. Buried in the county archives were century-old engineering maps, handwritten notes from my great-grandfather, and records confirming that the secondary water rights to the lake had never been transferred to the HOA. I spent the weekend walking the shoreline, watching how the water flowed. That $1 million resort Linda bragged about? It relied entirely on consistent water levels, boat docks, restaurants, fountains, all of it. And all of it depended on the dam my family controlled. The smell of diesel still hung in the air from their construction equipment as I realized the truth. Linda thought she was playing chess, but she didn't know I held the board. The inspection took nearly 4 hours. The poor guy crawled across every inch of my great-grandfather's stonework with calipers and moisture meters. When he finally finished, he looked genuinely embarrassed. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "your bridge is as solid as the day it was built." Then he checked his clipboard. "But current code requires seismic reinforcement for structures this size. Estimated cost for compliance, $3,000. You've got 10 days to submit improvement plans, or we'll have to condemn it. $3,000 for earthquake protection in Texas, where the biggest seismic event in living memory was when they blasted rock for the new highway. That's when Linda's plan revealed itself. The inspector handed me a business card along with the citation. Prescott Construction can handle the work. Rick Prescott gave me a quote for $12,000, said he could have it done in a week. I stared at that card like it was a rattlesnake. Rick Prescott, Linda's husband, offering to fix the problem his wife created for 4 times the cost. What a coincidence. That evening I started making phone calls. First was to the state contractor licensing board. A kind woman named Maria looked up Rick's file. "Sir," she said, "Mr. Prescott's contractor license expired 24 months ago. He's not legally allowed to do construction work." Next, I called my friend Jake at the county building department. "Jake," I asked, "that seismic requirement, it applies to existing structures too?" He laughed. "No, only new construction or major renovations. You're grandfathered in unless your bridge is unsafe. And here's your second knowledge nugget. Water rights in the American West often predate modern property law. They can override HOA rules, zoning ordinances, and even government land grabs." Armed with that, I dug deeper into my great-grandfather's old water rights. What I found made my hands shake. He hadn't just built a bridge and cabin. He'd secured secondary water rights to the entire lake system, back when this was still ranch country. Those rights included something called Flow Management Authority. In plain English, it meant I could legally control how much water stayed in the lake. For 2 straight days, I pored over the 1920s engineering reports for the dam. The design was genius. bypass channels that could redirect water around the main structure. My great-grandfather's bridge wasn't just for crossing, it controlled a secondary spillway. Meanwhile, Linda was busy working her social magic. She'd convinced 3 of my neighbors that I was unstable and dangerous. I came home one night to find new security cameras pointed straight at my house from 2 directions. Sarah noticed first. "Honey," she said, "Mrs. Rodriguez won't even wave anymore." And Tom at the marina? He acted like I was contagious when I stopped to buy bait. The breaking point came when Linda filed for a restraining order. She claimed I'd made threats about the dam and posed a danger to the community. The judge reviewed her evidence, just my public record request and HOA meeting questions, and tossed it out immediately. But the damage was done. Half the neighborhood thought I was some kind of domestic terrorist. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Was reviewing the resort's environmental impact study when I spotted a detail in the fine print. Their bank loan had strict water level conditions. If the lake dropped below a certain depth, their entire $4 million loan would come due immediately. The resort's grand opening was 3 months away. They'd already taken deposits for weddings, retreats, and tournaments. Linda's family had $500,000 of their own money tied up in it. That night, sitting in my kitchen, I realized something profound. Linda thought this was about HOA rules and property aesthetics. But she'd picked a fight with someone who understood the one thing her entire empire depended on: the water. Water doesn't care about bylaws or gossip. It flows according to physics and legal precedent, and now I finally understood that I held more power than any HOA president ever could. For weeks, the metallic taste of stress had never left my mouth, but that night it changed. I tasted possibility. Linda's patience broke the week before Thanksgiving. I was checking my mailbox when I saw her marching across the street in her ridiculous white heels, clutching a manila envelope like it contained nuclear launch codes. "Mr. Morrison," she barked, her voice sharp as glass, "I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting. Your bridge represents an immediate safety crisis that can't wait for normal procedures." She thrust the envelope at me hard enough to draw a paper cut. Inside was a notice for a crisis intervention meeting scheduled for the next evening. The agenda? Simple. Vote to authorize immediate bridge removal, with or without my consent. The meeting was chaos. Linda brought her golf partner from Dallas, some self-proclaimed structural engineer who'd never even seen my bridge but was happy to call it a death trap. His slideshow was full of dramatic terms like catastrophic failure and imminent public danger. Real professional stuff. The vote was swift, 7-1 in favor of tearing it down. The lone dissent came from Mrs. Chen, an 80-year-old resident who'd lived here since the 1960s. Everyone else had either been bought, bullied, or brainwashed into thinking I was a madman. "Demolition starts tomorrow," Linda announced, her grin barely hiding her glee. "Removal fees of $15,000 will be charged to Mr. Morrison's account. Failure to pay will result in a lien on the property. $15,000 to destroy something my great-grandfather built with his own hands." I drove home in a daze, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me from floating away. Sarah took one look at me, poured 2 glasses of wine, and didn't say a word. That night I did something I'd never done before. I filed an emergency injunction in county court, not because I was sure it would work, but because it was my last option. The hearing was set for 9 a.m., the same time Linda's contractor was scheduled to start demolition. At 8:30 sharp, I walked into that courthouse carrying a banker's box full of proof: water rights, expired licenses, evidence of HOA fund misuse, and engineering reports showing my bridge was safer than half the county's roads. Judge Martinez listened for exactly 12 minutes before reaching his decision. "Emergency injunction granted," he said. 30-day temporary restraining order issued. Mr. Morrison, you have 1 month to resolve this matter through proper legal channels." I called Linda from the courthouse parking lot. "Demolition's canceled," I said. "You might want to tell your contractor." The silence stretched long enough that I thought she'd hung up. Then came her voice, cold and sharp. "This is war, Mr. Morrison. I hope you understand that. Here's knowledge nugget number 3. Emergency injunctions can stop HOA actions if you can prove immediate, irreversible harm, but you need real documentation, not just frustration." That afternoon, I found something that made Linda's declaration of war look almost small. While reviewing public HOA financial records, I noticed some interesting patterns. Over the past year, Linda had approved more than $30,000 in legal consultations and emergency contractor services. Every single payment went to companies owned by her husband or her brother-in-law. I spent the weekend playing forensic accountant, cross-referencing business licenses, invoices, and corporate filings. It was clear Linda had been treating the HOA's treasury like her personal ATM. Then came the real discovery. Hidden in the county archives was the lake's original engineering survey from 1923. My great-grandfather hadn't just built a bridge. He had designed it as part of the lake's secondary flow management system. His structure wasn't just for crossing water. It was an essential control point tied directly to the main dam. For hours, I studied those faded blueprints, the musty smell of old paper filling my kitchen. My finger traced the hand-drawn water flow patterns, and the truth became undeniable. Linda had made a massive mistake. She thought she was battling a stubborn neighbor. In reality, my great-grandfather had been the chief engineer behind the entire lake system. He'd built redundancy and control into every part of it, including that bridge. That Sunday evening, I called my old professor from Texas A&M, a man who specialized in historical water rights law. After I explained everything, he was silent for a long moment. "Jake," he finally said, "if what you're telling me is accurate, you don't just own a bridge. You hold water management authority for the entire lake system. That's not HOA business anymore. That's federal water rights law." When I hung up, I walked down to the dock. The November air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and winter rain. For the first time in months, I smiled. Linda had declared war, but she had no idea what kind of power I was holding. 6 hours later, the lake level dropped exactly 18.5 inches. By sunset, the resort's $1 million boat dock sat stranded in the mud. Their grand opening weekend canceled. That same evening, the bank called in their $4 million loan. But here's the thing about water. It's patient and fair. Within 24 hours, I restored the normal flow. And suddenly, the investors were very eager to talk. James Chen, the lead investor, reached out first. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "we'd like to propose a partnership. You maintain your bridge as a historic landmark. We get stable water levels. Everyone wins." 3 months later, the resort reopened under new management. Linda was long gone. Last I heard, she'd moved to Arizona after facing federal charges for bribery and misuse of HOA funds. Her husband, Rick, lost his contractor's license permanently and sold their house to pay legal fees. The new HOA board, led by Mrs. Chen and Tom Rodriguez, established the Morrison Bridge Historic District. My great-grandfather's bridge became the centerpiece of a community heritage trail that brought in more tourists than Linda's luxury resort ever did. Property values didn't collapse like she predicted. They actually rose. Turns out people prefer living in communities built on real history and mutual respect, not control and intimidation. Sarah and I used our newfound recognition to create the Samuel Morrison Water Rights Scholarship at Texas A&M, helping students study environmental engineering. The fund came from speaking fees at a dozen conferences where I shared this very story. The first scholarship went to Maria Rodriguez, Tom's daughter. She's specializing in sustainable water management and already accepted a job with the State Water Authority. The award ceremony was held right on the bridge, surrounded by neighbors and friends. Tom was later promoted to resort manager and rehired every employee Linda had laid off during her reign. The resort now donates 5% of its profits to local schools and hosts an annual Bridge Day festival celebrating our town's history. Frank Wilson came out of retirement to train me in advanced dam operations, and now I serve as a water management consultant for 3 other lake communities dealing with their own HOA nightmares. Turns out there are plenty of Lindas out there and plenty of forgotten rights waiting to be rediscovered. Our legal case has already been cited in 12 federal water rights disputes across Texas. Patricia tells me our fight probably saved dozens of neighborhoods from being bulldozed by greedy developers who thought money could outvote the law. Today, my great-grandfather's bridge is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Every morning I walk across those limestone blocks he laid by hand, and I can almost hear him chuckling at how his engineering saved everything. The resort thrives. The community is stronger than ever. Our lake has become a model of how progress and preservation can coexist when people choose cooperation over control. Linda's downfall became a warning across the state about the dangers of unchecked HOA power. Last month, the legislature passed the Morrison Act, requiring all HOAs to respect pre-existing water rights and historic landmarks. Small victory? Maybe. But it matters. Sarah and I are expecting our first child this spring. They'll grow up running across that same bridge, learning to fish from the dock where I learned from my grandfather. Some legacies are worth every fight. Our neighbors actually like us now. We host barbecues, community events, and I've even helped a few homeowners solve their own HOA issues without draining any lakes. So if you're facing your own HOA nightmare, remember this: knowledge is power, history matters, and the law is your strongest ally. Drop a comment with your HOA horror story. I read every single one, and I've got plenty of ideas for dealing with these petty tyrants. And if you want to hear about the corrupt city council that tried to steal an elderly farmer's land and how a century-old mineral deed saved her family farm, hit that subscribe button. That's a story for next time. Now, the sound of children's laughter echoes off the old stone bridge, blending with the steady rhythm of water that finally knows exactly where it belongs. Friday morning brought the kind of chaos that makes you question reality. I was sipping coffee on my porch when 3 sheriff's deputies pulled up, followed by Linda in her spotless BMW, and 2 men in expensive suits who looked every bit like federal lawyers. Jake Morrison, the lead deputy, looked uneasy. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of criminal threatening and conspiracy to commit environmental terrorism for exercising legal water rights my family had held for a century. Patricia had warned me this might happen. Within 2 hours I was bonded out and sitting in her Austin office while she worked her magic with federal authorities. It turned out Linda's high-powered attorneys had convinced a federal judge that my water rights posed an imminent threat to interstate commerce and environmental stability. The restraining order was sweeping. I couldn't approach the dam, operate any water controls, or even discuss water management publicly. Linda had used the federal court system to strip away my only leverage, but Patricia just smiled as she read the order. "Jake, they just made a huge mistake. This restraining order confirms your water rights exist. It only restricts them temporarily. That's federal recognition of your claim." Within 6 hours, she had filed a federal lawsuit citing violations under the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899. Even better, she secured a counter-injunction that overrode the local restraining order. "Federal water rights always outrank local criminal complaints," she explained. "Linda's lawyers just handed us the precedent we needed. Here's the key lesson. Federal water rights enforcement can override local law enforcement when historical claims predate state or local jurisdiction." But Linda wasn't backing down. That afternoon, I learned she'd hired a private security firm to guard the dam around the clock. Ex-military contractors who looked like they'd walked off an action movie set. When Sarah came home from the grocery store, her face was pale. "Honey, there are news trucks parked at the end of our street. And Mrs. Patterson said Linda's telling people you're planning to poison the water supply." Poison the water supply. Linda had officially crossed from harassment into full-scale defamation. By the weekend, the media circus had exploded. Local news ran stories about domestic eco-terrorism and water rights extremism. Linda appeared on 3 different programs, posing as a concerned community leader defending innocent families from a so-called dangerous man with specialized knowledge. But media attention cuts both ways. By Sunday, property rights groups from across Texas were calling to offer their support. Environmental attorneys volunteered their help. Even some resort employees quietly reached out admitting they stood with me. The community was now divided. Old residents who remembered my great-grandfather rallied behind our legacy. Newer ones, afraid of falling property values, sided with Linda's development dream. Monday brought the nuclear option Linda had been preparing. The HOA board called an emergency community protection meeting and voted to authorize any and all measures necessary to block me from accessing the dam. In plain terms, they approved hiring armed guards to stop me from exercising federally protected rights. That's when Frank Wilson made a decision that changed everything. He called me at 6 in the morning with an offer that made my hand shake. "Jake, I've been running this dam for 30 years. I've never seen such nonsense over something so basic. I'm retiring effective immediately, and I'm naming you interim dam operator under your family's water rights authority. Interim dam operator, with federal recognition and legal control. Linda's private security couldn't touch me if I was performing official maintenance. Then came the final blow. Tom Rodriguez called, his voice tight but steady. Jake, she offered me $15,000 yesterday. Said if I could make it look like you sabotaged the dam controls, she'd guarantee me a promotion and a raise. I recorded the whole thing, $15,000 for false testimony. Linda had crossed from civil conflict into criminal territory. That evening, Sarah and I sat together on the dock as the lake rippled softly beneath a bruised sky. The air was heavy with the scent of coming rain. Tomorrow's the day, I said quietly. Linda's made her choice. Now I have to make mine. Sarah squeezed my hand. Your great-grandfather would be proud. Standing up for what's right isn't always easy. Tuesday morning would decide everything. Some battles aren't won by money or noise. They're won by those who understand the law, the land, and the legacy that runs through both. When dawn broke, the air was crisp and clear. I arrived at the dam with Patricia, Frank, and a growing crowd of reporters. Linda was already there, flanked by private security, deputies, and more lawyers than I could count. She stood between me and the control station, her voice sharp with false authority. You will not pass, she shouted. I'm protecting this community from a dangerous man who threatens our way of life. Cameras rolled. The county sheriff himself stood by to keep order. Even the resort investors had shown up, their faces tight with fear. I stepped forward, holding a folder of legal documents and Frank's letter transferring dam authority to me. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, projecting my voice across the water, I'm here to perform lawful maintenance on secondary water management systems that my family has operated since 1923. Linda moved in front of me, close enough for me to smell her perfume mixed with panic. I have a federal restraining order stopping you from touching this equipment. Patricia handed a document to the sheriff. That order was superseded by federal enforcement yesterday. Mr. Morrison has full legal jurisdiction here. The sheriff read, nodded, and stepped aside. Ma'am, he's within federal authority. Please move back. That's when Linda snapped. This is madness, she screamed. You're letting this lunatic destroy a $4 million investment over a piece of paper from 1923? People like him don't belong here. On live television, she'd just exposed what this was really about. Not rules or safety, but class and control. I knelt by the control housing and began removing the bolts. Each one rang out like a countdown. The crowd fell silent. Mr. Morrison, a reporter, called out, What exactly are you doing? I'm opening secondary flow channels designed by my great-grandfather, I replied. They allow controlled water release for maintenance. Everything I'm doing is legal and standard procedure. When the panel came free, I grasped the massive brass wheel that governed the valves. It turned easily, smooth and strong, just as my great-grandfather had intended. Sheriff, Linda shouted. He's draining the lake. Arrest him. The sheriff sighed. Ma'am, this is legal dam operation under federal law. There's nothing I can do. I turned the wheel 3 full rotations. Deep inside the structure, old gears roared to life. Water surged through the secondary channels with a deep, powerful rumble. The crowd gasped as the lake level began to drop before their eyes. Within 20 minutes, the water had receded from the resort docks. Linda stared, pale and shaking, as her $4 million dream literally drained away. You can't do this, she whispered. You're destroying everything we built. I stood, wiping my hands, and faced the cameras. Mrs. Prescott, I offered compromise. I offered respect. You chose conflict. This is what losing a water rights war looks like. By evening, the resort's shoreline would be nothing but mud. The grand opening was finished before it began, but amid the noise, one voice rose above the rest. Mrs. Chin calling from the crowd. Welcome home, Jake. Your great-grandfather would be proud. She'd turned neighbors against each other and treated our little lake community like her personal kingdom. That afternoon, I walked around the old dam structure, really studying it for the first time, not as a nostalgic grandson, but as an engineer. The 1920s construction was brilliant in its simplicity. My great-grandfather, Samuel Morrison, had designed manual bypass valves hidden beneath layers of moss and rust, yet still perfectly functional. The irony was almost poetic. Linda had spent months fighting me over HOA architectural standards, while sitting on top of a water system I could control with a few turns of a century-old valve wheel. That evening, I made a decision that would define everything that came next. I wouldn't use this nuclear option immediately. Linda deserved one final chance to act like a reasonable adult instead of a playground bully. But if she refused, if she kept pushing and trying to erase my family's legacy, then she was about to learn that some battles aren't won by whoever hires the most expensive lawyers. They're won by whoever understands the physics of water and the weight of history. I walked back to my cabin that evening with a strange sense of calm. For the first time in months, I wasn't the underdog anymore. I wasn't the man getting pushed around by petty authority and bureaucratic rules. I was the man who could drain their lake. The next morning, I started assembling my team. My first call went to Patricia Gomez, a water rights attorney in Austin who specialized in historical claims. Her reputation was legendary. She defended ranchers against corporate water grabs and knew Texas water law better than most judges. After I explained everything, she said, "Jake, if your documentation is solid, you're not just holding a strong hand. You're holding a royal flush in a game where everyone else thinks they're playing checkers." She agreed to take the case on contingency, which told me everything I needed to know about her confidence level. Patricia planned to drive up that weekend to review the original documents and build our legal strategy. Next, I called Frank Wilson, the old-timer who'd been operating the dam for 30 years. Frank had worked with men who learned directly from my great-grandfather. "Your granddaddy was a smart man," Frank said over coffee at the diner. "Built redundancy into everything. These new folks at the resort don't even know those bypass channels exist. Haven't been used since the drought of '86. Frank agreed to walk me through the whole system. He confirmed that what I planned to do was not only legal, but well within standard dam operation procedures. My team was growing. Mrs. Chen, my lone ally on the HOA board, introduced me to Tom Rodriguez, a maintenance worker at the resort. Tom was caught in the middle. He needed his job, but he'd grown up fishing off my great-grandfather's bridge. "Most of us know Linda's bad news," he confided. "She treats the staff like servants and the local contractors like dirt. But nobody wants to lose their job standing up to her." Sarah's sister, Monica, a paralegal in Dallas, volunteered to help with research. Within 2 days, she'd uncovered a mountain of evidence showing Linda's financial irregularities and HOA violations. The findings were explosive. Linda had been misusing community funds for months. Here's what I learned about building a strategy. Water rights attorneys often charge hundreds of dollars an hour, but historical claims like mine can be worth millions, if the documentation is airtight. When Patricia visited that weekend, she outlined a clear negotiation plan. We'd offer Linda a face-saving compromise. I'd keep my bridge, she'd retain architectural oversight for new construction. The resort would get guaranteed minimum water levels for their operations, and Linda could still claim public victory for preserving community standards. But we also prepared our last resort, the legal and literal nuclear option. If Linda refused, Patricia explained, I could lawfully exercise my family's water management rights by conducting routine maintenance on the secondary flow channels. That process just happened to involve releasing enough water to drop the lake below the resort's loan threshold. The timing couldn't have been better. Spring runoff season was ending, meaning any water I released wouldn't be replenished naturally for months. By the time the lake refilled, the resort would have missed their entire summer season. Frank showed me the mechanical process on a quiet Tuesday morning. The bypass valves were hidden beneath a concrete housing that blended seamlessly into the dam's foundation. Your granddaddy designed this so one man could operate it with basic tools, Frank said. Turn this wheel clockwise, and water flows through the secondary channel. Turn it back and it stops. I practiced until I could do it blindfolded. The wheel turned smooth and steady, a testament to Samuel Morrison's craftsmanship. Our plan was set. I'd give Linda one final opportunity to negotiate at the next HOA meeting. That was her last chance to walk away before learning what it meant to start a war she couldn't win. It was a clear, reasonable offer, delivered in front of witnesses. If Linda accepted, everyone would win. If she refused or tried to escalate further, I'd exercise my legal water rights. By Monday morning, Monica had prepared every piece of documentation we'd need in case this went public. property records, certified water rights, proof of Linda's financial misconduct, and a precise timeline of her harassment. If the media got involved, we wanted the truth to be unmistakable. A reasonable homeowner standing up against a corrupt HOA president. That Sunday evening, Sarah and I sat on the dock watching the sunset paint the lake golden red. The sound of the water lapping against the pilings was peaceful, but I could feel the current of change beneath it. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked softly, her hand finding mine. I squeezed her fingers, tasting the evening air thick with the promise of summer. "Linda made her choice when she decided my family's legacy was disposable," I said. "I'm just making sure she understands the consequences. Tomorrow she'd have her final chance to end the war she'd started. After that, the lake itself would decide who really held the power." Linda must have sensed something was coming. 3 days before the HOA meeting, Patricia called with news that made my coffee taste like ash. "Jake," she said, "they've hired Blackstone and Associates out of Dallas." My stomach dropped. Blackstone was a $2,000 an hour law firm known for crushing property rights claims. Someone was taking this fight very seriously. Within hours, they'd filed motions to challenge my water rights documentation, claiming the 1923 agreements were outdated and invalid under modern zoning law. They also requested an emergency hearing to dissolve my injunction, arguing I posed an environmental threat to the lake. But Linda's desperation was showing in other ways too. Word around town said she was calling resort investors, spinning wild stories about me, claiming I was a threat, that I planned to sabotage the property. Her paranoia was spiraling. By Thursday evening, she'd called an emergency HOA meeting. The agenda was short and explosive. Declare me a clear and present danger to community safety, and authorize all necessary measures to protect the resort's investment. When I walked into that meeting, the air felt thick with tension, nervous sweat, and cheap cologne. Linda's supporters had packed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began during the public comment period, "I'd like to present a final proposal to resolve this dispute." I spread my documentation across the table: certified water rights, the resort's loan agreements, and proof of Linda's financial irregularities. I keep my bridge as a historically protected structure. In return, I'll guarantee minimum water levels for the resort and support architectural oversight for all new construction. The room fell silent. You could almost hear Linda's thoughts turning over. "This is extortion," she finally snapped. "You're threatening to destroy a $4 million investment because you can't follow simple rules." Patricia rose calmly beside me. "Mrs. Prescott," she said, "my client isn't threatening anything. He's offering to guarantee your water supply in exchange for respecting his grandfathered property rights. That's called negotiation." Linda's face flushed red with anger. "I don't negotiate with terrorists," she spat. "This board will not be held hostage by environmental extremism." That's when Frank Wilson spoke up from the back of the room. "Ma'am, with all due respect, Jake's got legal authority over secondary water management that predates your development by 80 years. This isn't extremism, it's property law." The vote was fast and predictable. Linda's board rejected the proposal 6-2, with only Mrs. Chen and old Mr. Patterson supporting negotiation. Linda straightened her papers with theatrical smugness. "Mr. Morrison," she declared, "your threats hold no power here. This community will not bow to intimidation." Walking out of that meeting, the crunch of gravel under my boots sounded like a countdown clock. She'd been given every chance to walk away peacefully, and she'd chosen escalation instead. The next morning, the consequences of her desperation became clear. Tom Rodriguez called me just after dawn, his voice tight with fear. "Jake," he said, "you need to know. Linda offered me $10,000 cash to sabotage the dam controls. Said it would look like equipment failure and you'd get blamed for the damage." $10,000, I repeated, barely believing it. "She's panicking," Tom said. "I told her I'd think about it, then I called the sheriff. They're opening an investigation, but you should know she's getting dangerous." That afternoon, Deputy Martinez showed up at my door. Linda had filed a new complaint, claiming I'd made terrorist threats against the dam and resort. The deputy was polite but skeptical. "Mr. Morrison, I have to ask, have you made any statements about damaging the resort or endangering public safety?" I handed him copies of my legal documents and Patricia's contact information. "Deputy, everything I'm doing is completely legal under state water rights law. If Mrs. Prescott believes lawful dam operations are terrorism, that says more about her understanding of the law than about my intentions. After he left, I called Patricia with the update. Her response was firm and immediate. Jake, attempted bribery and false police reports cross a line. We're filing federal charges under water rights interference statutes. But listen carefully, if she's this desperate, she might try something that actually is illegal. Be ready. That evening I sat on the dock again, the sunset bleeding across the lake. My pulse was steady, but adrenaline burned beneath the calm. Linda had rejected negotiation, attempted bribery, and filed false police reports. She'd made her choice. Monday morning I'd make mine.